Great. Okay. So what we're going to do with judges here is just take a little bit of aside from our deviation from our flight plan starting next week with the Seder feast, but we're going to spend a bit of time looking at some of the judges. So my plan is to look at Gideon for a couple of lessons. And then look at the likes of Samson and some of the more well-known characters in terms of what they are at. So anyway, we'll just look at Gideon here. So Gideon is in Judges 6, 7, and 8. So we'll be looking at just chapter 6 today because you could do a big sweeping comprehensive thing of looking at Gideon, but Gideon's a fairly complex character in terms of what he does, and I think we just need to take a bit of time just to look at these kind of the starting point of Gideon and see where it goes. So setting the stage here, we'll just look at the first number of Bible verses, which is Judges chapter 6, verses 1 through 10. So if you remember, in terms of judges, there's been a number of judges that have come before this, like Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, and such. So, but some of these judges are more regional than national. Because some of the judges were just in a very small pocket of land dealing with bringing some sort of restoration. And then there was others that were more nationally oriented. But it says here, then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years, and the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel because of the Midianites. And the children of Israel made for themselves the dens, the caves, the strongholds which are in the mountains. And so it was whenever Israel had sown, the Midianites would come up. Also, Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. And then they would encamp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep, nor ox, nor donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents, coming in as numerous as locusts. Both they and their camels were without number, and they would enter the land to destroy it. So Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. And it came to pass when the children of Israel cried out to the Lord because of the Midianites, that the Lord sent a prophet to the children of Israel, who said to them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of bondage, and I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. Also I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but you have not obeyed my voice." So let me just highlight a few statements here. So the first thing that takes place, and this is this ongoing cycle that you see in the book of Judges, is that the children of Israel did evil. Okay, so that's that sort of statement is used quite a number of times in the book of Judges. And then it says there, so as a result of that, the Lord delivered them. And then the Midianites, as a result, then prevailed. So, and the Midianites were pretty nasty people. They were folk that destroyed crops. I mean, if you want to go and have, nasty warfare, go and take out the crops of the land and the livestock of the people that you're attacking. If you can get after their food, then that will bring them down quite quickly. So now the Midianites were putting the thumb on top of the Israelites for about 7 years. But now, So in verse 7 there, it says that the children of Israel then cried out to God, and then the Lord hears them. Now, what happens here is that the Lord then sends a prophet to tell them, kind of what color the sky is that they live in, and says quite plainly there at the end, "But you have not obeyed my voice." So we have this stage set here in regard to the Midianites and what they're doing, how they're attacking, and then after 7 years they are then crying out to God because of these people, and what the Lord does is He then says, "Look, this is why this exists." Sometimes we ask that question in life where things are maybe going wrong or going badly. Now, really, we know deep down it might be because of a sinful attitude or a sinful practice or behavior or whatever, and then we're going, "Why is this happening?" Well, God might send a prophet to you, and now a prophet in this day and age, you might sit in a meeting and you might hear somebody preach and say something, and you go, "That's hit me square between the eyes." And it highlights what's going on in your life. So the Lord's desire is to bring restoration in your life. His desire was to bring restoration with the Israelites. But as long as the Israelites are just thumbing their nose at God, they're just going to continue to go around in this circle, and be under the oppression of this particular enemy. So what I want to do next is then look at what God does, and then sort of put the brakes on a little bit and examine this. So, and this is what it says here in these next verses. It says, "Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under a terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belongs to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, 'The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor.' And Gideon said to him, 'O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles, which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites.' And then the Lord turned and said to him, 'Go in this might of yours, you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?' So he said to him, 'O my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house.' And the Lord said to him, 'Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man.' And then he said to him, 'If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talk with me. Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you.' And he said, 'I will wait until you come back.' So Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour, and the meat he put in the basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree and presented them. And the angel of God said to him, 'Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth.' And he did so. And then the angel of the Lord put out the end of his staff that was in his hand, and he touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and the fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread, and the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. And now Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. So Gideon said, 'Alas, O Lord God, for I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face.' And then the Lord said to him, 'Peace be with you. Do not fear. You shall not die.' So Gideon built an altar there to the Lord, and the Lord called it, 'The Lord is Peace.' To this day, it is still in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And now it came to pass that same night that the Lord said to him, 'Take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it. And he built an altar to the Lord, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement, and take the second bull and offer a burnt offering with the wood of the image which shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. So now know that is a long reading, but sometimes they say the longer the reading, the better. Just put my little mic attached to my zipper. Okay, so now where it starts out here, let's just look at these things sort of thing by thing. So we have the title of the screen, which is the coming and the calling. So God is coming to Gideon, and he is going to call him. So the angel of the Lord came, and he sat under a terebinth tree. Now, when you look at the Bible, trees are mentioned quite often, and this tree called a terebinth tree is mentioned, I think, 25 times in the Bible, and generally, in terms of the stories where you see this type of tree. And it's not a particularly big tree, but it is a bushy looking thing. And so when you see the tree, say in the middle of a bit of scrub or something like that, where it's quite arid, it does look quite prominent. And so it looks quite round and quite bushy. And so people would have sat under these trees to get a bit of shade. But where these trees are mentioned in the Bible is often where God appears, and God is bringing some kind of a message. So this tree really is about God's provision and God's presence. So the angel of the Lord came, and I always love that word came, because it just, especially when it's in association with God, because we need God to come. We need God to come into the midst of our circumstances, in the midst of our life, and come and say something. But now it uses this phrase, the angel of the Lord. Now this is what is referred to in theology as a Christophany, which is, angel of the Lord. So this is a Christophany, which is an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament. So this is a person. This is not a thing. Okay, so the burning bush is a theophany, and that's more of a, if I can say this with reverence, an object. Okay, it's a thing. Whereas here, this is a person. This is somebody coming, from God. But because there is worship that actually takes place here in the presence of this angel, that means that this angel is God himself. Because if it was just a kind of normal angel, and this does happen in the Bible, where an angel, a messenger of God, one of those seraphs or cherub, sort of angels, messengers of God. Anytime man did try to worship them, the angel says, "No, don't be doing that. I'm a servant just like you." So, but here there's worship that takes place. So this is God meeting with Gideon. But I think it's interesting that the Lord comes and he sits under this tree, and so he doesn't come and immediately have a conversation with Gideon. He comes, he sits, and I think observes, what is taking place. Because what's then going on as the angel of the Lord is sitting under this tree, is that it is while Gideon was threshing wheat in a wine press in order to hide the wheat. Now, this phrase or this line here really demonstrates how bad the circumstances were, because you don't thresh wheat in a wine press. That's just not done. And the reason it's not done is because when you thresh wheat, you do it on top of a hill, and you do it where there's a lot of wind. So when you thresh the wheat and you throw the wheat up into the air, the wind then blows the chaff away, and the heavy grain then falls down onto the threshing floor. You gather that up and you make your flour and do all those sorts of things. But a wine press was in a valley or a gully where there was no wind, and it was in a stand of trees, because you didn't want to be cooking your wine out on top of a hill where the sun was. So it was in the shade. And so when grapes were being pressed, and oftentimes that was done by a man who stood on them and, kind of stamped on the grapes, and that's what made the juice. And then that went down a wooden trough or some sort of a stone made sort of contraption. So eventually then the juice was then gathered down at the bottom, and then it was then used. So, but that was done in the shade, out of the wind, and that was a more hidden sort of thing. But here he is trying to thresh wheat in a wine press. So it's going to be awful hard threshing wheat in a wine press, because there's no wind there. So, but he's doing this because he's trying to hide it from the Midianites. The Midianites, as soon as they see food being dealt with, well, they're going to see that, they're going to come and they're going to burn it. They're going to destroy it. I mean, it's awful, to go and, destroy food, So, the angel of the Lord here comes, he sits under this tree and observes Gideon's really dire circumstances, So if we're in hard circumstances, whether it is in our own makeup and our own minds, because sometimes we can, as we say in Northern Ireland, pass ourselves, and everything's all dead on and thumbs up and all that kind of stuff. But in actual fact, there is turmoil within us and a lot of consternation. But God can come and God can sit with you, and he will observe what is going on. Not that God needs to do observation work, because God knows all things. But I think from a human understanding point of view, if you went to the doctor, for instance, and maybe this is not a great example, but because you only have 10 minutes with your GP, but the good doctor will listen to you. The good doctor will observe things. He'll take your temperature. He'll do your blood pressure. He'll ask you what are the symptoms, what's going on, and engage with you. Now, I imagine that sometimes we have gone in to the doctor and he says, what's wrong? And then you get about a half a sentence out and he's doodling around on his computer writing you a script. Here you go out the door. That's not a demonstration really of listening and observing. So, and then, that might happen with a variety of different people. People don't engage with people in this day and age. They're not listening. I remember one time I was talking with a guy on the phone, and I was sitting at my computer and I was distracted by something while I was talking with him on the phone, and I kind of went click click, and he must have heard that over the phone, and he says, "Are you distracted? Are you listening to me?" I was like, she did, but click, and and you want to backpedal out of that because you don't want to be caught, and yet, the reality is I was caught on, trying to multitask. Now, I know women are a lot better at multitasking than men. I'm sure you. No. Yeah. Yeah. Big comeback there. All right. But isn't it wonderful that God observes you? You know, God sees what's going on with your life. So because these lines aren't just put into the Bible just for the sake of it. They're put in there, you know, very strategically so that you can see what God is doing. Because what the Bible is about God. It's about how God interfaces with man. So the Lord appears at our lowest place, and then he brings the hope of his presence and his perception, you know, because when he's speaking there to Gideon, he does then, you know, say, talks to him about you being a man of valor, you know, and now I think if I was Gideon, I would be like, who are you speaking to? Obviously, it's not me, you know. But this is God's perception, you know, and so God sees what's going on, but he also sees way beyond what's going on, and praise the Lord for that. So, so then Gideon gives his reaction with his understanding of the current situation, and then his assessment of God's involvement. And note that I use the word reaction as opposed to response, because he is emotionally driven. You know, he's in the midst of this situation, trying to thresh wheat in the winepress, and this isn't working terribly well. And this has been the story of his life, probably from the day and hour he was nearly born, maybe. Well, maybe not quite, because this has been going on for 7 years. So probably as a child, you know, as he said, you know, we were told by our fathers, this happened, that happened, you know, God did this, God did that, and probably heard what that prophet had said in the verses prior to that. But he then makes an assessment about God's involvement. And this is what he says. He says, but now the Lord has forsaken us. Well, guess what? That's not true. And he delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. Well, that is true. You know, how often do we get truth and non-truth or falsehood mixed? So, because the Lord does not forsake people. When you go out and look throughout the scriptures, and there's one exception, throughout the Bible, God does not forsake anybody. There was only one occasion where God forsook somebody, and that was when Jesus was on the cross. Because Jesus then cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? So that was a statement of fact there. You know, Christ, that wasn't Christ having a kind of a bad feeling or something like that. That was true. You know, because of our sin being placed upon Christ, God had to forsake him and judge that. Okay. So, but when you look throughout the Old Testament, people would perceive that they've been forsaken by God, because they would then perceive that, oh, God's left us. God's, you know, not on the scene. God doesn't care. But that's not actually true. The reason they believe that is why? Because they're in sin. Guess what sin does? Blinds you. It blinds you to truth. So, but it's interesting, you know, that when God listens to this, he actually doesn't get stuck into Gideon about it. He doesn't say, look, no, I haven't forsaken you. We'll need to correct this. So he doesn't actually do that. So, because, you know, oftentimes when I'm sitting with people, I'll, you know, ask people, well, what is your perception of things? How do you understand things? You know, and I do ask people the question, you know, they might come to me and say about a certain word or a certain understanding of things. Well, tell me what you understand. And then if they say to me, well, you know what I mean, I'll go, no, I don't know what you mean, because I can't get in your head. You know, so the only way I'm going to know what you mean is by you telling me what you mean. So, but sometimes people want to use that, you know what I mean, kind of thing as nearly a cop out. So, but anyway, so Gideon gives his reaction with his understanding of the current situation and then his assessment of God's involvement. His assessment is a mixture of things that are not true and true, because the fact is that God did deliver them into the hands of the Midianites, and that was because they did evil in the sight of the Lord. Okay, so now, despite Gideon's half-true assessment, the Lord commands him to go and save his people. So this is where God then, after this whole observation takes place, this listening to what Gideon's assessment is, because God is interested in how you see things, and then he'll then go in and say, well, right, okay, despite what you're saying, I'm telling you what you need to do is you need to go and you need to save these people. Now, sometimes God aims pretty high, and he tells us a certain thing, which then invokes again, another reaction out of us, which is, no, I couldn't do that. Well, actually, that's good that you're coming to that conclusion, because then God can then step in and help deal with that. So let's go into our next page here. So Gideon then highlights to God that he is the weakest in the family. So he says, my clan's the weakest in Manasseh. I'm the youngest person in my family. I am absolutely low man on the proverbial totem pole here. So because I think, Gideon having to thresh wheat in a wine press and do all those terrible things and trying to get on in life and eke out some kind of existence, it doesn't do an awful lot for your confidence. So for God then to come to him and say, right, what I want you to do is go and save the people. And it's like, well, that's not what life's telling me. Or the world, or my flesh, or everybody else, is telling me that I'm not up to much. I'm no good. And when I was growing up, I was told that often, that I was, wouldn't really amount to much. And I kept on kind of proving that by not doing very well in school, and instead of trying to kick the ball with the rest of them, I would just go, well, sure, you've told me that I can't kick the ball, so, well, I can't kick the ball. And I'll prove it to you. I'll miss it. And so sometimes you just, and then I've told the story about, there's captain number 1 and captain number 2, and then they would, pick, kids for the team and all that kind of stuff. And then I was always the last one left, and then they would fight over who wouldn't get me, so for me. Well, anyway, God's the one that's clever. So he's saying something. Yeah, no. So anyway, but but it is interesting what our upbringing tells us. And now there's that can swing the other side too, which is, you could be told, boy, you're the bee's knees, you're something absolutely special, and you'll do great things, and then that doesn't happen, and so there's lots of things that can take place that are very much the opposite of perhaps where we're wanting to go. But I mean, again, I didn't do well grade-wise. I didn't do well, even up into university and that kind of thing. I didn't try my best because I actually really didn't believe that I could. It wasn't so much that I didn't want to. I just kept on telling myself that, I'm not really up to it. Well, things did change because when God's call came in, That's where it changes. So now God does call us in our life when we get saved. We're called to salvation. We're called to discipleship and that kind of thing. And there is a growing period. But it's later on that God then starts to develop and gives these bigger challenges, like this, where, God says, right, what I want you to do is go and save this people. And then you're like, what? No, can't, this isn't going to happen. And yeah, yes.
People, you're saying about how you felt subdued by what people were saying. There's other people who would be the very opposite.
Mm-hmm.
They would just dig the heels in and say, well, I'm going to prove you wrong.
Yeah.
People do.
Mm-hmm. So, and then there's the batch of people out there that say, hey, absolutely, yes, I can do that, no problem. And then they're riding on the crest of this wave of their own pride. And then that's not going to fly either.
Again, my father used to say there's nobody that you least want to be working on your car than a boy who thinks he knows everything about cars, but he doesn't.
Yeah. So, I know. So, and yes, and one thing that we've learned within Stars is, if we know and understand that we can't do for people what they're asking and that kind of thing, we then go, well, I can't help you, but there's somebody else that can, and so, anyway. So God's response is that he will be with Gideon and that the defeat of the Midianites will be comprehensive. In fact, he uses this language, you will defeat Midian as one man. Now, I find that, I find various phrases in the Bible interesting, and I find this one man phrase interesting because it is used on occasion in the Bible where it's talking about a comprehensive thing. One of the other occasions where this one man idea is used is in Nehemiah chapter 8, where the people of Israel gathered as one man before Ezra as he preached about the law, and which was a great passage of scripture about the preaching of God's word. But everybody was united, everybody was there, and everybody was there for the same purpose, so and here it says that the Midianites are going to be defeated as one man, which means it's going to be a comprehensive defeat, so it's not going to, there's not going to be some leftovers of these people or whatever. So but the thing that God says to Gideon here is that he will be with Gideon. That's what makes the difference. Because when you go through, again, different portions of scripture here, in fact, the first sermon I ever preached was about this, actually. And it was this thing where God approaches people and says, this is what I want you to do. The men that are approached come back to God and says, no, can't do this because, and they enumerate, some bunch of weaknesses and some bunch of problems. And actually, you doing that's a good thing because you're then realizing you have limitations, you lack power. And but in every occasion, God then comes back and he says, I will be with you. That's the thing that makes a difference. God doesn't come back and say, yeah, but you have education, you have experience, you have this, you have that. So when he went to Moses, at the burning bush, he says about delivering the people of Israel from the hand of Pharaoh and all that kind of thing. What does Moses do? Well, sure, I can't talk. Well, sure, I got exiled. Sure, yeah, I'm this, that, and the other thing. Who am I? But God then responds. He doesn't say, yeah, but you had this experience of being brought up in Pharaoh's household, and you went to the University of Egypt, and you actually did learn how to do public speaking and all that kind of stuff. God didn't go down that line. God says, I'll be with you. So here he says to Gideon, right, go and save this people. Well, I'm the weakest in my family. I come from Manasseh, and who cares about them? And those are the weakest. So God then says, but I'll be with you. When he approaches Jeremiah in the Jeremiah chapter 1, he says, God approaches him and says, I've appointed you to be a prophet unto the nations and upon my people. And what's Jeremiah says? Jeremiah says, yeah, but I'm a youth. I don't know how to talk. And what does God say? I'll be with you. So that's the thing that makes the difference. So and when God is with you, then it'll be comprehensive. Because God is not going to leave any stone unturned. He will get into every area of your life so that it is sanctified. To me, it's interesting that threshing wheat is one of those things that's highlighted because as we've talked about before, the words for threshing wheat in the Bible is the same for holiness. So here's Gideon trying to separate wheat from the chaff under duress and under bad circumstances. But you know what God does? God comes straight into the middle of that mess and says, but I'll separate you. I'll thresh you. I will separate the chaff from the wheat. So God then gets into Gideon's life and says, look, see your chaff about weakness and about your inability and all that kind of stuff. I get that. I understand that. But when I get stuck into you and use the way of the fork, then all that's going to go away and you will then be a strong individual. You'll be, how does God approach Gideon right at the get-go? You, O mighty man of valor. Who's that? So, this is God looking beyond where you're at. So, now, as a result of this, then Gideon sees this as an opportunity to worship the Lord. So he says, right, okay, if it's really you, let me go and get some stuff about worship. A pot of broth, this meat, this unleavened bread, and a variety of different things. And this is what would indicate to me that the person that is talking to Gideon here is no other than God himself, because this is about worship here. And it's interesting that this is the first order of business is worship. Because again, looking back to Moses, when Moses saw the burning bush, what does God say to him to do? Take the sandal off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy. So that is worship needs to happen straight away. Back at when Joshua met the man with the sword drawn, okay, what was that individual telling Joshua to do? Take the sandal off your foot, because the place where you're standing is holy. So that there's all these incidences where the first thing that takes place is the worship of God. He doesn't get straight stuck into thanks God for telling me that I'm going to go and save the people. So boom, I'm away and I'm going to go and do this. No, the first thing he needs to do here is he needs to worship God. So, because so often this is what happens with us. We busy ourselves. We busy, and I fail in this area too, where it's, because I'm in full-time Christian work, it's almost easier to be busy, doing busy things and doing, and people would look at it and say, boy, he's a godly person, because he's busy. Now sometimes God says, stop it. Don't want you to be busy. I want you to worship. I want you to stop and look to me and say, as Jesus said with the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. That's the first order of business in the Lord's Prayer, is hallowing God. It's about the worship of God. So But so Gideon does this. He sees this as an opportunity to worship the Lord. And the Lord accepts the offering as Gideon's shepherd as he touched it with his staff. Now, I saw this morning and found this very interesting to think about because God touches all these things with the point of his staff. Now, again, this is not just some incidental detail here. I think this is quite significant because I think, you know, when somebody is there with a staff, this is shepherd stuff. Okay. He was not standing there with his if this person was in the role of, say, a man of authority in terms of a king, he would have not had a staff. He would have had what was called a Shabbat, and that was basically a shorter sort of stick. It eventually became what was known as a scepter. Okay, when king things kind of progressed through society, kings then had a scepter, which was a long stick, but it wasn't a staff. Staff was more of a shepherd implement, whereas the Shabbat was the more of, you know, this is authority, you know, kind of idea. So God is coming to Gideon here as his shepherd, as the one who's going to guide him, as the one who's going to teach him, as the one who is going to lead him to green pasture, as the one who's going to lead him to still waters, and all those sorts of things that you find in Psalm 23. So, because that's what Gideon needs. You know, can you imagine Gideon's head? Can you imagine Gideon's mind at this time? You know, it would be all over the shop. You know, it would be, you know, what's going on? I don't understand this. This is terrible. You know, and then you're just kind of running from pillar to post. You know, so what Gideon needs is, he doesn't need somebody of boom authority. He needs a shepherd. He needs somebody to get alongside of him, sit under the tree with him, and say, look, I understand what you're talking about. I hear you, but I do have authority because I am a shepherd, you're a sheep. Okay. So, but he then touches the offering, and then it gets consumed. And then what Gideon then does is he builds an altar to emphasize a certain aspect of the Lord, which is the Lord is peace. So now, if you read this in the King James Bible, it would say Jehovah Shalom. Okay. Other versions of the Bible will say, you know, Adonai Shalom. And the New King James, which is what this is, it says the Lord is peace. So, you know, it does give us the proper translation. But this is a wonderful aspect of God bringing peace into the midst of a lot of chaos. You know, there's a lot of disturbance that's going on here. You know, because the Midianites haven't been dealt with yet. Okay. You know, sometimes when we read these stories, we read the whole story and we go, yes, okay, Gideon met God, and then, you know, did the thing where he got 32,000 boys to go against the Midianites, and then God says, no, send whoever's afraid home. 22,000 left, got left with 10,000, and then that gets whittled down to 300. And, you know, and then they defeat the Midianites. And, you know, so we end up, you know, running to the end of the story and seeing the conclusion. But sometimes you need to go methodically through the story and go, okay, the Midianites haven't been even dealt with yet. So, but what is the conclusion that Gideon comes to? God's a God of peace. God's going to bring peace. So, you know, I remember years ago, you know, when we had some financial constraints with Staris, and we were short 3,000 pounds. And I remember we were praying, and we actually gave thanks that God was going to provide. Now we hadn't seen the provision yet, but I remember sitting in the office going, Lord, we thank you that you have provided. I mean, that's what we actually did. We says, Lord, you have provided. It hadn't been provided at that particular point, but that's how God worked in us. He says, no, you trust me because I look forward. I look way beyond you people. So you trust me in this. And so we trusted God. Half an hour later, the post comes in the building, and there's one check for £3,000. So all right. All right. Okay. Oh, music.
Well, there's something here. That's my fault. There's a statue of Baal in Gideon's house.
Yes.
It's going to put it down.
Yeah.
But yet Gideon knows how to worship the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of a mix.
Yeah. Now that's an interesting observation there. How does he know this? You know, because obviously his dad was a worshiper of Baal, and but you know, maybe because of what was said by that prophet earlier on, or things that, because he does say, you know, we heard that God did these things. So so there was probably, I would say, probably in the midst of all this, you know, people, 7 years prior to this, you know, people were worshiping God because it was under the rule of Deborah and all that stuff. So, or the guidance of Deborah. So, so I would say they knew, but then they saw the oppression of the Midianites, and it's like, well, sure, we'll just go and worship these other gods. So they probably had the practice of worshiping God as a known practice, probably 7 years prior. So, now, when you look at other parts of the Bible here in terms of the Lord is something, with Abraham taking Isaac and the sacrifice of Isaac and all that, you know, God intervenes and he provides a sacrifice instead of Isaac. And what does Abraham call that place? He calls it Jehovah Jireh, or Yahweh Jireh, or Adonai Jireh, which means the Lord provides. You know, so there's a lot of situations, and you know, where the Lord is extolled. There's an altar made, and the name of God with a certain kind of description is put toward it. Now, we've talked about the Hebrew word peace before. You know, that'll take about 15-20 minutes to get into it, but we've done that. But the Hebrew word shalom basically means the removal of established authorities that promote chaos. You know, that's, so if you work backwards through this, their situation is chaotic. Their response to it in their mind is chaotic. That has been put there because they have allowed the establishment of certain gods and certain idols to go and promote that kind of idea. See, the worship of Baal and the Ashtaroth and all that nonsense that was going on, you know, it was chaotic. Okay, it was bonkers. You know, the kind of stuff that was the worship of those idols was just mental. But what God then has to do in order to bring peace is he has to remove these things, which is what Gideon actually then does. Okay, he actually calls this place the Lord is peace, and he then allows God to then tell him how peace is then going to be enacted. So because what Hebrew peace is the subtraction or the addition of some element that comes from God in order to bring completeness. Okay, so right now they're in a very incomplete sort of mode, because of the worship of Baal and the Midianites and all this mess. So, but strangely enough, it is not going to be the addition of something to it that has to be removed in order for the things of God to be complete. So, so what we have here just finally is we have the idols in Gideon's house, Gideon's father's house. They needed to be removed, and they then were replaced by the altar of the Lord. And as you read through that story, which we didn't read through the rest of that thing, because what happens is Gideon goes and takes those 10 men and tears down the altar of Baal from his father's house, but he does it at night. And then when the men of the town then wake up in the morning, they go, well, where did Baal go? What happened here? And then they find out that Gideon had done it, and then they were all on for killing Gideon. But then what happens is Gideon's father, Joash, steps in and says, well, sure, if Baal's real, Baal can sort himself out. Baal can look after himself. And well, guess what? Baal doesn't look after himself because he can't. And so that's why I say here, Baal could not save himself because he has no power. Really, the things of darkness, the things that are idols and that kind of thing, really don't, in and of themselves, have any power. The power that they have is whatever you give them. So Gideon was, told by God, look, if you're going to experience peace in the land, there's going to have to be a removal of things. And so he removes these idols, the Baal and his consort, the Ashtaroth, which was the wooden pillar. Okay, because that was always associated with wood and trees and all that kind of stuff. But you can't put the altar of God in and then remove the thing. There has to be a removal, then the altar.
That's what I was looking at there when I thought that the altar of God was built first.
The altar of God was built at the terebinth tree.
But then I was
Yeah.
thinking, that's like God saying, you don't clean yourself up
Yeah.
before you come to me. You come
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. Yes, I understand that. And that's a good thing to bring up, because because what happens within Gideon is God needs to be in him first. But then when you go to the situations, you then have to remove things, and then you put God in there. If I can put it like that. So yeah, good thing to bring up. But really, you can't have God, mixed in on top of your bad mess. Okay, so but for Gideon, he was separated from for God. He was made holy. There was worship there. There was the altar that was built. God is a God of peace. But in order for this peace to actually work in his circumstance, there had to be a removal of the idol, and then that other altar was then set up. So, but I thought it was interesting. Joash's kind of response to this was, well, sure, if Baal, has power, then Baal can sort himself out. So they, you sort of think, well, maybe Joash wasn't sort of, too daft, because maybe 7 years prior to that, when things were good under Deborah, he was a man that did worship God. And over that period of 7 years, maybe he was just under pressure from, other quarters within his own family to go, well, sure, God's not weighing in here. God's forsook us, so might as well worship other things. But maybe inside, he knew better. Maybe inside, he's saying to himself, no, I've always had some misgivings about Baal. So maybe Baal's not what he's cracked up to be. Yeah.
Because Gideon's quite
Weak.
unsure of himself.
Yeah. And so yeah, I think Joash probably projected that kind of thing into Gideon because he himself was weak. Yeah.
But yet he's now prepared to stand up to the men of the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
At the end,
Yeah.
So there is strength there.
There's latent strength. And so this is what God's then feeding into. We have this wonderful verse in Philippians 1:6 that says, and he who begun a good work in you will complete it unto the day of Christ. So what a great thing, because you think back in the days of when Joash may have walked with God, God started to work there. God wasn't done. Even though, yeah. So even though there was mess, even though there was a disaster, and so often this is what happens with, say people, and we've seen this with our kids and that kind of thing. They make professions of faith when they're young, say at a Good News Club or something like that. And yes, I'll ask Jesus into my heart, or, and they do those things, and they seem to have a fervor for God for a period of time. And then they hit their teen years. And then they go, and you think, what on earth happened there? Were they saved at all or something? Because when, Elaine would talk about in her testimony how she believes that she actually got saved when she was 9. But, God then really stepped in a major way at the age of 23. But God keeps going. God doesn't forget things. God doesn't look at your life and go, oh, darn, that didn't work out terribly well. And kind of, blow and tut and that kind of thing. God keeps going. And God says, no, we're not finished here. We're gonna keep her lit.
Yes. So how do you know if somebody has made a false profession? That's what you said is exactly what our Philip did.
Uh-huh.
He got saved whenever he was young, and then whenever he got his teenage life, it all went downhill.
Yeah.
Was he ever really saved?
Well,
You don't know what's ahead.
yeah, and this is the thing, is you don't know what God will do with that, because we're not God, and this is why we have to trust God with it. Whether he got saved as a young person or he didn't may not be for you to figure out. That's God's business. I would say that God is at work in your family, and God is on the move. God's on the prowl. Now, you may not be in this scene of time when Philip comes back to the Lord. And
But in the meantime, Siobhan, thank God for the work that he's doing in his life, like you.
Yeah.
Thank God for the check that was coming that he didn't know about.
Yeah.
Yeah. You accept it as a done thing.
Yeah.
Well, Ian does, don't you, Ian?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, because where God sows seed, God will bring growth. God does not just kind of fling things around and kind of hope for the best. God starts work, God completes work. But as to how he does that work, and how he completes that work is not up to us to go and try to dictate to God how that's going to work. Because sometimes we get a little bit demented by, why isn't God moving? Well, God is always moving. God is always doing.
Even when he's sitting under the terebinth tree.
Yes, even when he's sitting under the tree and he's observing and he's watching what's going on, and the angel of the Lord picked the right moment while thing was, well, Gideon was threshing wheat, and then he steps in and he says, hail, O mighty male of valor. You know, so,
Do you think, you know, God does, I know people who did profession and you would have said were
Shaking.
dodgy Christians,
mhm,
and then God allowed them to go out into the far country,
yeah,
like a prodigal son,
mhm,
and then when they were brought back
yeah,
to realizing
mhm,
their ways, they actually become really good Christians.
yeah,
Maybe better so than the people who you would be saying, well, he's not like him. He ends up better than him.
yeah,
Because he gets you to the end, God gets you, lets you go to the end of
Then you're
yourself.
telling, and then you realize that here, this is not about me. You know, as you said
Yeah.
earlier on, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us.
yeah,
But they don't really sometimes, whenever you become a Christian, really understand that fully. And then you get a wee bit further down the line and you realize, you know, it's not about me at all, it's God that's doing this whole salvation thing's not
yeah,
to do with me at all, it's to do with God.
yeah, absolutely. So,
You know, like sometimes people say, when you can say it flippantly, like, you know, once you're saved, you're always saved. You know,
mhm,
well, if you're truly saved, you're always saved.
yeah,
But there's an awful lot of people really that,
yeah, I think you're right. There's an awful lot of people that think that they're saved and they're no more, you know, because there are a lot of people that would raise their hand at a meeting, you know, and I've heard this where, you know, people say, oh yes, I prayed the sinner's prayer and I think, and then the comment would be made, you know, really they didn't understand. They didn't get it. Now, God could use that in subsequent days to you know get it right and all that kind of thing, you know. So
there's a lot of people, they're sort of living their life depending on what they did way back then. And you can't live like the devil and die like an angel, you just can't.
yeah, so
You
no,
know?
I think there.
I think we judge people too
Uh,
much.
Yes.
And because they don't fall into the category that we perceive
Mhm.
to be, I'm thinking about the thief on the cross. Funny, I was at the funeral yesterday, and it was a guy who I had went to school with. I was telling you about it earlier on, and I just heard about a week or so ago that he was dying with cancer, and I had planned to go to see him, and then the next thing it appeared in funeral times that he had died, and I thought to myself, I have missed my opportunity because he wasn't from a Christian background. I went to his funeral yesterday, and it was, you know, it was a brilliant funeral because the minister had went to see him the day before he died and he became a Christian.
Mhm.
And his sermon with that was all about the thief on the cross, which was very unusual for a funeral service.
Yeah.
But
He gets the same
we
reward.
were looking
Yeah.
at the two thieves on the cross. He was looking at the two thieves on the cross and how, you know, would the thief on the cross look to us to be a Christian?
Mhm.
But what I'm
Because what
saying,
we perceive a Christian couldn't.
Yeah.
what I'm saying, Kevin, is, you know, there is some people who are dependent on what they did years ago, but they're just living their own life. They're not,
Aye.
you know,
Well,
they're
to a
just,
certain extent, we're all dependent on what we did years ago, because that was the time when we repented and we put our trust.
but you're saying you're not seeing any.
Yeah, I
Two things, words are, you know.
I think if there's no conviction in the people's lives, you know, they could be doing their own thing, but oftentimes there's a little chink in their conscience, and they're going, I'm not really where I should be, and I don't like it. But if people have no consciousness of themselves that what they're doing is wrong, yeah. But at the end of the day, it's God that assesses that. It's God that judges that, you know. But I think it's incumbent on us to say, you know, look, you know, you said you were, you know, if you had opportunity, you said you were a Christian, but you know, there's a lot of inconsistencies there. If God gives you that opportunity to say those things in love, you know. So
Well, personally speaking, you know, I was saved when I was 9. Looking back, you know, I made a commitment.
yeah.
Go to school and go to secondary school, and I failed the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
But God had his hand upon me.
Yeah.
Right through school.
Yeah.
And then he spoke to me here in the youth fellowship,
mhm,
and he came to me, just like he come to Gideon there.
yeah,
No, God has a plan,
yeah,
and he come down and he speak to us, and if we're backsliding, God will bring us back.
yeah.
That's it.
Here's John Lennox's story that he tells about whenever he got married and he used this girl. And he talks about the cookbook.
Yes.
And he says, you know, well, they met this girl and says, if I presented her with a cookbook and said, well, like, I like such and thing, and there's the ingredients. And if you can do that and you can make it to the way it's supposed to be done, then in about 20 years, I'll consider whether I'm married you or not. And it's not about us living our lives and then God decides, well, you have done it for 20 years or whatever, then you're part of God's kingdom from the minute you put your trust in Him.
Yeah.
What is the definition of backsliding? And I remember a man saying one time, if you're not living for the Lord today the way you were yesterday, to an extent you have backslidden. And we tend to have this
Yeah.
idea in our head, unless you do this, and this.
Mhm. See, I think in Christendom today, we have a certain set of standards that we've developed. And if people adopt certain language and certain lifestyles and certain values and these kinds of things, we say, oh, okay, so those people must be saved or they must be something.
Yeah.
Could be true. Now, I'm working with people who are coming from some very unchurched and, uninformed backgrounds, and their operating knowledge of the scriptures is pretty scant, if at all. And now, some of those people have professed faith, to use that terminology. They have improved, they have grown up, they've developed in their faith, but it may not be in a way that us evangelicals might go and say, tick, tick, tick. So, because they might not quite have the same sort of language. I would say the morals and the values are certainly there, but they're just not quite packaged in the way that we kind of like, So, but that's because we end up using our experience and we use ourselves as a standard. And really, at the end of the day, the only standard that really works is the Word of God. So that, and that's why when it says in 1 Thessalonians, where Paul encourages the people in Thessalonica, test all things, you test it according to the Word of God. You don't test it according to your experience. You don't test it according to your standard. You don't test it according to man's thing. So this is what happens within denominations. So, if I go, and I've had this experience with Pentecostal churches, I would go in and they, one of the first questions, is, if you've been baptized in the Spirit, have you, do you speak in tongues? A lot of different things. And they use that as a spiritual barometer to see where you're at. I don't speak in tongues. Does that make me then a not spirit-filled Christian? No, because the Bible is clear about how that works. But people from certain sorts of background, I'm not saying all Pentecostals and that kind of thing. There's a lot of very good Pentecostal people. And but sometimes they end up saying, oh, well, this has been our experience, and then boom. And I remember preaching in a Pentecostal church in this country one time, and I was told that all the people, well, most of the people in the worship band on the Sunday were all clubbing on Saturday night, and getting completely off their heads, ripping it on drink and so on and so forth, and probably going to bed with some girl, whatever. And then they're coming in the Sunday morning and praise the Lord and, songs, and all this kind of stuff. And I was told that this was a regular feature. So anyway, I was preaching at the nighttime service, and boy, did I get stuck in, and I said, this isn't on, and and you could see some of these people kind of going, getting all, getting a bit squirmy, and but but there are a lot of Christians today, or people that call themselves Christians, that base their lives upon a fuzzy experience. Not,
It was Pentecostal.
yeah,
And she was really godly, she spoke in tongues, but she was a really godly woman,
Yeah.
you know. And she said that she could tell if somebody was truly saved because her spirit identified with their spirit. You ever heard that?
oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that, and yeah, and that certainly is true, and that's been my experience in cross-cultural situations where people didn't speak English and they didn't speak my, language or whatever, where I've, come across people who are Christians and
Yeah.
so.
It's the same when you listen to all these different preachers. If you know within minutes of listening